So if you look at the classic story of The Boy Who Cried Wolf, from the villager's perspective, it's really a story about the exhaustion of constant panic. You
Yeah,
know, like
absolutely.
when that bell rings for the fourth time, they don't grab their pitchforks. They roll over and go back to sleep totally
I'll just
desensitive.
tune it out completely.
Exactly. And according to the stack of listener sources we are diving into today, that is exactly what is happening right now with global environmental policy. Welcome to the deep dive. We are taking the materials you sent us and extracting the underlying mechanics of a very provocative argument.
Yeah, we are specifically looking at two highly critical texts today. One is called Echoes of Alarm, a chronology of failed environmental prophecies, and the other is The High Price of Environmental Alarmism.
Right.
And the mission here is to unpack a really specific claim, which is the idea that modern environmental alarmists have historically and currently manipulated data or, deliberately omitted it to shape public policy and incite fear. They're misusing this data for their own ends.
But before we get into the mechanics of how this data manipulation supposedly works, we really have to lay down some strict ground rules for our discussion today.
Oh, absolutely, because the sources you provided contain some highly politically charged material regarding climate change policy and activism.
Yeah, that's heavy stuff.
It is. So I want to make it unequivocally clear from the jump that neither of us here is taking a side. I mean, we are not endorsing these viewpoints, and our goal is certainly not to debunk climate science.
No, definitely not.
Our strict mandate today is just to impartially report on the exact ideas contained in your original source material. We are going to analyze how these authors construct their arguments, what specific data they focus on, and what they claim the mainstream narrative is deliberately ignoring.
Right, we're just the tour guides mapping out this specific intellectual landscape.
Exactly, just looking at the architecture of the argument.
So the authors build the entire foundation of their case, not on atmospheric chemistry, but on a calendar. They map out what is essentially a graveyard of doomsday deadlines.
Yeah, it's a literal timeline of catastrophic predictions.
Right, ones that came with hard, specific dates and then just quietly vanished when the apocalypse didn't show up.
And the breadth of that timeline they present is really what anchors their thesis. I mean, they argue that to understand the current policy landscape, you have to look at this historical pattern of prophecies, warnings that were broadcast widely enough to just saturate the public consciousness.
When you hear these failed predictions stacked back to back, it actually highlights a bizarre pattern. Like according to Echoes of Alarm in the 1970s and 80s, the loud public prediction was mass starvation in America.
Oh, wow, yeah, hundreds of millions dead from famine.
Exactly. And then, moving into the late 70s, the narrative shifted to the oceans. Like they were predicted to be entirely dead within a decade.
Right. And then you get into the 1990s and early 2000s where the warnings actually pivoted to a new ice age and severe global cooling.
Which is pretty wild to think about now.
It is. It's a stark contrast to the warming narratives that dominate the discourse today. And the authors point to that as a prime example of, shifting the goalposts.
And the predictions just keep coming with incredibly specific deadlines. Like, by the year 2000, entire nations were supposed to be wiped out by rising seas.
Right. The Maldives were famously predicted to be completely uninhabitable by either the 1990s or 2018.
And then in 2008, there was this widespread claim that New York's West Side Highway would be underwater. Plus, the UK public was told their children wouldn't know what snow was within a few years of the millennium.
Yeah, and we were warned the Arctic would be entirely ice-free in the summer of 2013, which was then revised to 2015 and then pushed to 2018.
It just keeps rolling. Oh, and they also highlight the claim that the Himalayan glaciers would be gone by 2035.
Right. That one is particularly notable because it was later admitted to be an outright typographical error.
Wait, really? A typo?
Yeah, a typo that somehow made its way into major official policy reports.
Wow. Which brings the text right up to the modern era, referencing a 2023 deadline shared by Greta Thunberg that implied humanity would be wiped out unless fossil fuel use ended.
And that year has obviously come and gone.
Right. It's like having a friend who confidently predicts a massive stock market crash every single Tuesday. The first time, you check your portfolio. By the 50th Tuesday, you just tune them out entirely.
Exactly. The exhaustion sets in.
But I do have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Weren't the models just less advanced in the 1970s? I mean, it seems a bit unfair for the authors to judge a 1970s prediction by 2024 scientific standards, or to blame the whole movement for a few fringe outliers.
Well, the sources actually anticipate that exact defense. When these deadlines pass, the common rebuttal is to claim that those extreme predictions were never the, quote, official scientific
Right,
consensus.
they just blame the media.
Exactly. But the authors fundamentally reject that excuse. Their counterargument is that whether a claim was technically a peer-reviewed consensus or just a fringe theory, it misses the point entirely.
Because the public doesn't read peer-reviewed journals, they read headlines.
Precisely. These claims, however scientifically dubious, were still printed on the front pages of newspapers. I mean, they were quoted by politicians to push through legislation.
Yeah, and campaigned on by highly funded pressure groups.
Right. They literally changed what children were taught in classrooms. So the text argues that when a terrifying claim is shouted loudly enough to drive up international energy prices and alter voter behavior, the scientific establishment cannot just brush it under the rug later as a colorful exaggeration.
The damage is already done.
Exactly. The authors argued the mechanism of fear was successfully deployed. The immediate damage to public trust and that immediate economic shock occurred regardless of the long-term scientific validity.
Okay, so if throwing out hard deadlines continually backfires and destroys the movement's credibility, how is this narrative still driving global policy today?
Well, the sources argue the movement simply realized that specific dates are a liability, so they adapted.
They changed the playbook.
Right. They abandoned the calendar and shifted toward a demand for ideological purity. They maintain their leverage through a very deliberate omission of context.
And the high cost of gullibility provides a fascinating historical lens for this shift.
Yeah.
Like, the author compares modern environmental alarmists to historical crackpot naysayers.
Yeah, if you look back at medieval Europe, you had individuals claiming to hear angelic warnings of an imminent rapture. Or, the classic street corner crank wearing a sandwich board reading, "The end is nigh."
The guy ringing a bell demanding everyone repent.
Right. And the authors argue the core archetype remains identical today. These are individuals who do not operate on cold, hard data. They operate on empathy, sheer volume, and forceful manners to spark mass panic.
Historically, the text points out, this kind of manufactured hysteria led to literal wish hunts. The panic demanded a scapegoat, and society provided one.
But as society modernized, we learned to view the guy with the sandwich board as harmless. We stopped paying attention.
So the tactic had to evolve to recapture that attention.
They grew clever, yeah. By removing the specific dates from their prophecies, the near-future catastrophe never actually arrives, which means it can never be definitively disproven.
Ah, it's a clever trap.
It is. The source argues that modern society has simply swapped the old religious rapture for a secular environmental rapture. It's a brand of doom and gloom that thrives on keeping the public in a constant state of elevated emotional distress, completely divorced from factual context.
And their prime example of this tactic, what they call data omission, is the UK's current obsession with net zero policy.
Right. The UK is a perfect case study for their argument.
The authors detail how the UK public is being told they must entirely deindustrialize, give up gas heating, and abandon their own energy security just to save the planet.
Yeah.
But to sell that extreme domestic sacrifice, the authors claim an absolutely crucial piece of data is being deliberately hidden from the conversation.
And that omitted data point is the global context. If you look at the raw mathematical numbers, the United Kingdom produces less than 1% of global emissions. Less than 1%. So wait, to follow the source's logic to its natural conclusion here, if the UK goes through all this extreme economic pain, completely shuts down its industry, and magically reaches net zero tomorrow, what actually happens to the global temperature?
Their blunt answer is absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
Nothing. And this really highlights the core of the author's frustration with how data is manipulated by omission. When you press the most ideological proponents of net zero on what the actual measurable global impact of the UK's sacrifice will be, they dodge the question.
Because acknowledging the reality breaks the psychological leverage they have over people.
Exactly. The reality is that the other 99% of the world, including massive, rapidly expanding industrial powers, will just continue business as usual. Global temperatures do not pivot based on the actions of 1% of the globe.
So the text argues that the alarmist narrative demands massive, incredibly painful local sacrifice for a global benefit of zero. Right, and the only way to get the public to agree to that sacrifice is to deliberately omit that 1% statistic from all those emotional pleas to save the Earth.
They're essentially convincing the villagers to burn down their own houses to stop a forest fire that is burning on another continent.
That's exactly how the sources frame it.
But the sources go beyond just the omission of emissions data. They argue that physical, geological reality is being entirely ignored to maintain the panic.
Yeah, this is where we look at the ground beneath our feet. Activists frequently point to rising sea levels threatening the UK coastline as proof of an impending climate apocalypse.
Right.
But the authors highlight a massive scientific blind spot in this narrative. It's a geological phenomenon known as the post-glacial rebound effect.
I found this part of the text fascinating. Can you break down the mechanics of how this rebound actually works?
Sure. So during the last ice age, the northern part of the island, Scotland, was covered by a massive, incredibly heavy ice sheet. And the Earth's crust is not completely rigid, right? It floats on the viscous mantle below.
Okay, makes sense.
So that sheer weight pushed the crust down in the north. Think of it like pressing your fist deep into a memory foam mattress. Because the north was pushed down, the southern part of the island, England, physically tilted upward, like a seesaw.
Oh, wow. So when the ice age ended and the ice melted, the weight was finally removed.
Right, and just like a memory foam mattress slowly expanding back to its original shape, the crust is bouncing back. It's a process that takes thousands of years.
So as a matter of natural tectonic geology, Scotland is physically rising out of the ocean, and England is slowly sinking into it.
Precisely, and the authors are pointing out that this is a natural, ongoing geologic process that predates the Industrial Revolution by millennia. It has absolutely nothing to do with modern carbon emissions.
The text makes the point that no amount of carbon taxes and no amount of deindustrialization will stop a tectonic plate from shifting.
Right, so by pointing to changing coastlines in England as evidence of human-driven climate change and just ignoring the post-glacial rebound, the alarmist narrative is fundamentally misusing natural environmental data to stoke fear.
Well, if governments are taxing citizens and overhauling economies to try and stop tectonic plates from moving, that brings up a massive secondary issue.
Yeah.
Who is actually paying for all of this?
Yeah, we have to talk about the money.
The texts lean heavily into what they call the economic shell game, specifically targeting the idea that green energy is somehow free.
The narrative sold to the public is very simple. They say, the sun shines for free, the wind blows for free, therefore the energy produced should be cheap and clean.
Which sounds great on paper.
Right. But the sources bluntly state that in the world of physics and infrastructure, there is no such thing as a free lunch. They outline 3 massive hidden costs that are kept out of the public conversation, starting with the physical machinery.
Right. I mean, a wind turbine doesn't just sprout from the ground like a tree.
Exactly. The raw materials have to be mined, refined, manufactured into massive infrastructure, and then imported at a huge expense from abroad.
And the authors note the irony that this equipment often comes from countries with terrible environmental and labor records, which kind of contradicts the entire ethical premise of the movement.
It really does, but the supply chain issue is just the first part. The second hidden cost they detail, the constraint payments, this genuinely blew my mind.
Wait, yeah, let me make sure I'm translating the source's argument correctly here. They claim that the UK public pays exorbitant heating bills, essentially to subsidize wind farms to stop producing energy. How is that physically or economically possible?
It sounds absurd, but it is a very real, very expensive mechanism of the power grid. It all comes down to bottlenecks.
Okay.
Often the wind blows very hard in Scotland, generating a huge surge of electricity. But the power grid infrastructure, like the actual high-voltage cables and pylons that carry that power south to the dense population centers in England, physically cannot handle that much electricity at once.
So the physical wires just lack the capacity, so why not just build bigger wires?
Well, because building overland high-voltage pylons takes decades of planning, and it faces massive local resistance. I mean, nobody wants giant transmission towers in their backyard.
Right, correct.
So you have a massive supply in the north and massive demand in the south, but essentially a dirt road connecting them.
So what happens when the wind farm pushes that massive surge of power into a grid that just can't handle it?
It becomes a literal physics crisis. The grid operates on a very specific frequency, usually 50 hertz. If you push too much power into that bottleneck, the frequency spikes.
That's bad.
Very bad. If the operators don't intervene immediately, the physical infrastructure melts down, transformers blow, and you get massive cascading blackouts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so to prevent the grid from destroying itself, the operators have to call the wind farms in Scotland and order them to shut down their turbines, even though the wind is blowing perfectly.
Wait, let me translate that. We are essentially building a giant factory in a town with only one dirt road, and then paying the factory millions of dollars to halt production because the delivery trucks keep getting stuck in the mud.
That is a perfect analogy. Because those private wind companies entered into contracts expecting to sell that power, the government, using taxpayer and ratepayer money, pays them billions in constraint payments to literally turn off.
So they are financially rewarded for inefficiency.
Exactly. Which leads right into the third hidden cost, the backup power. Because you just ordered the wind farms to shut down to save the grid, or maybe because the wind just naturally stopped blowing, the population in the South still needs electricity that exact second.
Right, you can't just turn off hospitals and homes.
No, you can't. So the grid operators have to pay traditional gas-fired power stations to fire up and provide the necessary baseload power.
Wow.
And the source highlights the incredible expensive irony here. You are paying the wind farm a premium to shut down, and simultaneously paying the gas plant a premium to turn on.
You are paying twice for the exact same megawatt of electricity.
Yes, it is an economic shell game that directly results in exorbitant utility bills for the average citizen.
And the absurdity of this system reaches its peak when the texts discuss the North Sea gas reserves. Like, if the UK requires gas plants to back up these sporadic wind farms, where is that gas coming from?
Well, driven by the loud demands of the alarmist narrative, the UK is actively shutting down its own domestic gas production in the North Sea to appear virtuous on the global stage.
But because the physical grid still relies on that gas, they are forced to import it from Norway, or import liquefied natural gas LNG from the United States.
Right, and this is where the authors argue the environmental logic completely collapses. They're saying the UK refuses to drill for natural gas in its own backyard for optical reasons.
Yeah.
But they will happily pay a massive premium to have that gas supercooled, loaded onto a diesel-burning cargo ship, hauled thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean, and regasified.
And the authors argue that this process actually creates a vastly larger carbon footprint than simply piping it locally from the North Sea.
Exactly. It's a policy driven purely by the optics of alarmism and the demands for ideological purity. It's completely detached from logical, environmental, or economic reality.
So we have dissected a lot of moving parts here. I mean, we looked at the timeline of failed deadlines, the strategic shift toward emotional manipulation, the deliberate omission of global emissions data, the refusal to acknowledge tectonic geology, and the incredible economic black hole of constraint payments. Let's bring this all back to you, the listener.
Yeah, let's tie it together.
In a world full of competing narratives, why does understanding the mechanics of these specific sources actually matter for you?
It matters deeply because we exist in an era of unprecedented information overload. I mean, we are bombarded with apocalyptic messaging daily. The sources you provided act as a loud, aggressive warning against taking the word of every merchant of doom at face value.
The core lesson here isn't about abandoning the concept of environmental conservation. It's a masterclass in critical thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a reminder to look under the hood, check the historical track record of the people making the predictions, look at the global mathematical percentages before you agree to massive local sacrifices.
Right, and understand the underlying physical reality like grid bottlenecks or geologic history. And perhaps most importantly, follow the money. See who is getting paid billions to turn their turbines off.
There is a final thought I want to leave you with, though. Something that builds on the text but looks toward the long-term consequences of these tactics.
Okay, what is it?
The sources warn us extensively about the immediate financial drain and the social disruption of this modern boy who cried wolf scenario. But consider the psychological toll.
Right.
If generations of the public are repeatedly subjected to these terrifying doomsday deadlines and they continually realize the data was manipulated or the context was deliberately omitted, the ultimate danger might not just be expensive heating bills.
It's the apathy.
Yes. The real danger is the creation of total, impenetrable public cynicism. If a genuine, slow-moving environmental crisis does require our measured, rational attention 50 years from now, will anyone still be listening?
Or will we have completely tuned out the warnings, assuming it's just another guy on the corner with a sandwich board?
Exactly.
If the bell rings too many times, the villagers simply stop waking up. Thank you so much for sharing these fascinating, challenging, and highly provocative sources with us. It's a powerful reminder that finding the truth often requires us to look past the blaring headlines, push through the emotional manipulation, and dig into the actual data ourselves. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.